Michael, welcome to the stage.
Thanks very much, thank you. Morning, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be talking to internal communicators. I like you much more than I do HR people. Be careful what I say. Are there any HR people here? One, two, okay. The stuff that we do is kind of a crossover between internal comms and HR. So we kind of deal with HR people in organisations and internal comms. But it's really about social technologies, how this is moving on. I think that's why you guys kind of like it, because employee research is becoming much more social, much more collaborative, much more interactive. So here's what I'm... Is this working? No? Okay, is there another clicker? Because this is going to work if... Okay. Do you want to go back? There we go, thank you. Right. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. Got quite a lot to get through, so I'm probably going to go quite fast. I'm going to talk about social technologies and employee voice, how that's changing. Then I'm going to go on to slag off employee surveys. This is what I go around doing for the last 3 years, and I feel quite credible about doing this as well, because I used to work in big market research companies in academia. I'm an occupational psychologist, and I was head of employee research at Unilever. I looked after their surveys. I think now with the technology, there's just much more engaging, believe it or not, ways to do this kind of research. The main reason I've come to talk to you is to talk about this project we did with HR Magazine about the future employee research. We use this collaborative tool. We've just done the analysis, so I'm going to talk about the findings of that, which I think are very interesting. And if we've got time, I'm going to touch on some other stuff about devices, data-driven storytelling, social network analysis, and then talk about at the end what's stopping us from implementing all this great stuff, because I think organisations are scared to move away from surveys, as we'll find out. So, social technologies. We did this report for the CIPD. They asked us, it was the first time we've been paid to do anything, paid to write a report. It was about social media and employee voice. The crux of this research report is really that employee voice is changing. It depends how you define employee voice, because it used to be that it was giving people, people say giving employees a say, and if what you mean by that is just getting people to tick some boxes and write a comment and we'll take that very much and you'll never see that again, or do you mean that employee voice is giving people a say in an open forum, which is actually very different. It's what some forward-thinking organisations are starting to do. So, social technologies, any kind of technologies that allow people to create content, to interact, to collaborate, it's really changing the way that we exchange knowledge and information. So it's a very powerful feedback mechanism, not only in organisations. I'm sure you're all implementing some of these internal social networks, Yammer, Chatter and Jive, but also externally, what employees are saying about you, that is about your employer brand, about what you're like as a company when they come to interview. Did they have a nice time? But we all like to read reviews on Amazon or on TripAdvisor, so it's a very powerful feedback mechanism. When you get a lot of people writing stuff, it makes it even more important that you're able to analyse all that text. So advances in text analysis, which is becoming pretty powerful now, is largely in part to this growing volume of unstructured data out there on the internet that organisations want to get their hands on, that they want to understand. And also in organisations, that's only going to get more so too. So text analysis is becoming increasingly sophisticated. It's certainly moved on in the 10, 15 years since I started out. But it's basically about extracting meaning from written text, categorising comments up into easy-to-understand categories. You can understand grammatical word relationships. You can understand sentiment, so in terms of polarity, how negative or positive comments are. You can even get into the nitty-gritty, which for employee research maybe isn't that relevant, but about emotion, what people talking about love or frustration, which emotions are they talking about? Because in the same way that I could give you a comment to read and say, what emotions is this person feeling? How positive or negative is this person? You could do that, and all your brain's doing is processing that information, looking for keywords, the way it's written. And that's what these computer programs are able to do now. The other important thing is to be able to link this to structured data. So it's grouping people on the basis of what they're talking about, and then look how they score if you are asking some tick boxes. How do these people that are talking about leadership score on measures like engagement, for example? Text analysis you know, when you get someone saying, oh, we did a text analysis on all this data, I mean, that can mean anything. You know, it can mean stuff like this. I wanted to put a word cloud up because, you know, these are really rubbish. And if anyone tries to pass a word cloud off as any attempt at doing any text analysis, you should really give them a slap on the wrist. You really have to use keywords. You can't just do it on frequency of words because lots of people describe things in different ways, using different words. And it's also in the way it's kind of presented. If you think it gives, you have a very long word like technology or a very short word like data, it would make it look like technology was much more prominent than perhaps data. And there's loads of other disadvantages to it. But if you're going to use text analysis, then there are some great tools out there, and you should really be steering away from this sort of rubbish. After I talk about this, I'm going to do a quick poll. So I was told to tell you to get your phones ready. This is the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of people discussing things in an open forum. And it's a big problem. I don't know if you've ever encountered it, but it's the problem with lists of comments, okay? The big problem with linear lists of comments is that they're very unwieldy, it's kind of information overload. Once you get more than 20 or 30 people, there's no way that you can navigate that conversation. So the worst thing is that not everyone is heard. If you have 1,000 people taking part in a conversation, and you're the next person to write a comment, like who's going to read that one? So lists favour early birds. If they have some basic rating mechanism, they favour people with extreme opinions. So here's a good example that I picked out the other week. George Osborne talking about his work for benefits scheme. 2013 comments they have on the BBC news website for this. And it's only by chance that I come across this comment from H2A on the 30th of September. Why not give them all a pickaxe? Get them building the HS2 link. Better still, bring back the workhouse. That'll solve the housing crisis too, and get rid of the bedroom tax debate. Now, we only found this great comment by chance. This is the thing about displaying stuff in lists, that no one's going to read this comment. I don't actually think that's a good comment, by the way. I know you don't know me. Okay. So, poll. I don't know if we're going to swap over now. I wanted to get your views on what your organisations think of employee research surveys. So, if your organisation stopped doing employee surveys, which of the following would be true for you? This is not a greatly designed question. There's probably too many categories here. But 1, no one would even notice. 2, it would be noticed, but it would not make any difference. 3, employees would protest and demand its reinstatement. 4, leaders would protest and demand its reinstatement. 5, we don't do employee surveys. I'd be interested to know if anyone don't, maybe if it's a small company. 6, I would be unemployed. I'd be very interested to see these results. Okay. Well, I mean, this is really interesting. So we do have some people who'll be unemployed. How unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. We don't do employee surveys, a couple of people. I assume probably that's because you're a small company rather than that you're blazing a trail and you've banished employee surveys, which a few companies have, but not many. But this is really interesting. So 2 leaders here. It would be noticed, but it wouldn't make any difference. I mean, that very much ties into the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So this is going to work quite well. Leaders would protest and demand its reinstatement, and I think that's key to some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Like these surveys and their metrics are so embedded. Leaders love to sit round with their scores and have a joke with other members of the boardroom about, I got this, what did you get? My engagement score's this. We need what you target. This linked to my bonus, and all this stuff. And I think that's kind of quite damning. Okay. So can we switch back over and I'll move on. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, so I apologise if any of you have seen me talk about this stuff before. The first criticism that I want to make of employee surveys is that they're really dull. I've never met anyone that likes filling in employee surveys. In fact, most people don't like them. And even most people who are running these surveys in companies don't like them. I think they just don't want to admit it to themselves. It's meant to be engaging. There's nothing more disengaging than year after year, every 6 months, sometimes every month, no matter how often you do these surveys, about ticking a load of boxes, and that's somehow meant to be employee engagement. There's too many numbers, not enough focus on open-ended questions, text comments. And this like bogs people down in terms of historical comparisons, internal comparisons, worst of all, external benchmarks and what's going on in other companies, which is completely irrelevant anyway. And then people trying to be ultra-scientific about it, key drivers analysis, and this is driving that, and it's, it's just procrastination. It's stopping people from getting on with the important stuff, which is acting on some of this feedback, although it's actually pretty difficult to act on, as you'll see, because the results are kind of meaningless. It's just a load of numbers. Surveys also fail to really take into account or to maximize how we process information as humans. So it's commonly thought now that there are two systems in terms of the way that we process information. It's system one, very fast, very automated, very emotional responses, and system two, much more kind of slow, much more deliberative, much more thoughtful, much more intelligent processing of information. And if you think about surveys, certainly when I used to fill in surveys, it's tick, 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 quick as you like, not going to bother to really write a comment, no one's going to read that. If I do write a comment, why am I going to construct a carefully worded response for that just to kind of disappear? So what you really want to do, and if I had a big organisation, I'd be wanting people to engage system two. I'd be wanting people to really think about these issues, some important issues, what's going on in the organisation, and to get their feedback, not for them just to be ticking a load of boxes as quickly as they can. I kind of mentioned this one already, but what happens to that information that you provide in an organisation makes a really big difference to whether people are going to write any comments or give any feedback and the richness of that comments that they get. So, I mean, I don't know if any of you have the chance to write open-ended questions. I mean, I don't know what the research is on how many surveys ask open-ended questions, how many don't. I'd probably reckon it's somewhere about half and half. But it's very difficult for you to know what happens to that information. If, for example, it's not going to be posted up online for everyone to read and rate and respond to. The worst thing about surveys, I'm sip of water, is that they completely ignore the criteria that you need to allow communities to be wise. So in terms of collective intelligence, this means that there has to be some method of aggregation. There has to be a mechanism to allow people to make collective decisions. And for that, you need interaction. So surveys won't provide this because it's just people firing up feedback in isolation and individual, and that's been aggregated at a senior level or by someone like me at Unilever saying, yes, I'm collating all this information and this is what it's saying, as opposed to letting employees shape that opinion and feed it up to senior leadership as a united voice. So now I'm going to move on to talking about, there's probably lots of other disadvantages with surveys as well. Those are the kind of main ones that I like to pick out. So we did this project with our technology. It's a public study which asked the question, how is employee research going to change over the next 15 years? And it started out, we have a network of organisations. It's called the Future of Employee Insight. We meet every few months. So this was the first one that we did earlier in the year. We thought we'd do one of these collaborative research projects to feed into the first network event. So it kind of looks like this. What you're looking at here is a visualization of people's opinions about how they feel about employee surveys and employee research. The visualization is kind of very important because it allows each of the comments to be heard, as I'll explain in a minute, and you'll get the picture. So this was the question that we asked, how do you think employee research will change over the next 15 years? Each of these blooms that you see is a response to that question. And the visualization positions people next to people who have similar opinions. So it's a visualization based on similarity of attitudes. But it said there was about 250, 300 people took part in this study altogether, but it's only pulling out for each person that goes in a random stratified sample of comments for each person to review. And when you share it out, it means that you can weight comments by how new they are, how many times they've been read. In that essence of that is that at the end of the completion period, everyone's comment has had an equal chance of being heard. So if you went in first, your comment's been read 50 times, the system will stop showing that one until all the other comments have caught up. You'll get how this works as we go along. So here's a video of it. We got picked up by HR Magazine. They're going to run a feature on it in next month. So these blooms, the size of it is related to how insightful these blooms are. The colour is how much you agree with this response. So you can click on any. The idea is you go in, you click on rate 2 blooms, read the response to the discussion question, rate it in terms of how much you agree with it, how insightful is it, and then you get a chance to plant your own bloom in this garden by filling in these positioning questions. These are quite leading. The traditional employee survey is dead, the future employee survey is qualitative. I'll come on to these in a minute, but you can see the point moving in space. So what it's doing there, it's positioning you alongside other people who have similar opinions. So you can see the spread of opinion, you can see where you stand in relation to other people. And we've got lots of examples of how we use this with different organizations about different issues, employee engagement, internal communications, and the like, which I'm not going to go into today. Then for this one, because it's a public study, you create an account, you get to write your own comment, yada, yada, yada. And you get to see how people are rating your comment. So here's my comment. You don't need to read that. It's basically about hologram Robert Winston, and you have a chat with him, and there's speech recognition and stuff. It's a bit of a stupid comment, but the community has told me that. This is the feedback on my comment. Most people disagree with it, although a lot of people think it's insightful, although not these people down here. So that's very good as well for people in organizations, being able to get feedback. You know, a lot of the time we get stuff about, we don't want people to write stuff, the conversation can become very cynical. I think that's fine. I'm fine with cynicism, as long as the community can then jump on these people and say, no, your comment's rubbish, we disagree with you, or we agree with you. That's fine. So here's the questions that we asked. I thought I would, before I give you the responses to these, I thought I'd get you to answer a couple of them. So we asked 5. I'm going to get you to respond to these 2. So if we can change over the IML guys again to the poll, and let's see how we get on with those. I'm going to compare your results. Right, it's not going to be strictly comparable because you're answering this on a 5-point Likert scale. We're using a visual analog scale, which is slightly different, but who cares? It's not academia. Wow, okay. Disagree. That's yeah, okay. All right, we'll come on. That is very different from what we found in the study. Amazing, okay. My organization uses social technology to gather feedback from employees. Okay, so it looks like there 30% of people agree. Still got a lot of people disagreeing with that. I mean, if that mirrors, as you'll see, what we kind of found in our research as well, that there are not a huge amount of organizations kind of doing this stuff. And even when they're doing it, it can be very basic, maybe a discussion, facilitated discussion on their internal social network or something like that, although there are organizations who are obviously blazing a trail in this area. Okay, I'm shocked by the answer to that first one. Here's what our population said. 53%, I mean, the majority of you, I forget what the number was disagreeing with this, the employee survey. That's not what we found. It's interesting when you ask stuff on a visual analog scale is that you can see not only the agree, disagree, but you can also see the spread of opinion, like a histogram, as well as the mean. But I'll just take you through these quickly. The future employee research is qualitative as opposed to quantitative. Again, majority, 69% of people agree. My organization uses social technology to gather feedback from employees. 58% of people disagree. I mean, that was kind of in line with what you guys were saying. Mobile technology will be the most common way employees voice their opinion. Yes, 82%. And the biggest threat to advancing employee research is leaders' fear of transparency, 71% agree. So they're kind of interesting findings. There's only 5 metrics there, but it gives you an idea that I'm not saying let's give up on surveys altogether. Like, obviously, you want some metrics to keep leaders happy and to have some kind of comparisons, but you really don't need 100 of them, perhaps 5. So, what we can do when we have all those community ratings is we're able to identify from this community of people which are the top authors. So in a way, it's like a kind of devolved text analysis, because you're devolving the responsibility to the community to rate different comments. So the output of this approach is that even if you just read the top 10, the top 20 comments, you should really get the idea of what are the key issues coming through. So I'm not going to go into these in much detail because they're in the pack, so you can read them anyway. But this was the top comment that we had, some guy in America. The difference will be amazing. Today we create hypotheses and then go and collect the data. Tomorrow we'll be doing the inverse. The constant steady state accumulation of data will enable us to look at the data before we form our questions. That means that we'll be getting answers to questions we didn't know to ask. We'll be unthinking a whole bunch of things we assume to be facts. The second top author was talking here about move away from traditional annual employee survey to more frequent, more interactive research as people become more confident in using social media. And a third one, again, about employee behaviour becoming increasingly traceable and measurable as more information about their activity is electronically captured. So you can see all these themes coming through. There'll be a report on this, which will be freely available to everyone anyway in the next couple of weeks. So you can get into it as much as you want. Here's a word cloud I thought I'd do. Obviously, it doesn't really tell you much yet. Engagement, surveys, organisation, technology, research, employee. Just to demonstrate from what I'm going to tell you now that this really is a waste of time. What you want to do is to create categories of keywords that you can then look at the different text categories within all that. And this is what we found. So I think we've got 10 or 11 categories here in terms of what people are actually talking about, in terms of how it's going to change. So the first one, and I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail, is about analytics, big data, data mining, text mining, surveys. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about that. Social media, collaboration, real-time, stuff about devices, mobile, where that's going to lead as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. Much more of a move to qualitative, the importance of leadership in all this. And these last two, a move to mass transparency, which is what's happening in the real world. And also about actionability of results as well, which is an issue which is close to my heart. Being able to use text analysis means that you can also look at these text categories by different metrics that you've also captured in the research, and this is the beauty of this approach. So each of these bubbles reflects one of those text categories. The size of the bubble is how many comments we had about that issue. Sorry to people who are hungover if that made you a bit dizzy. This is the community rating in terms of agreeableness of those text categories. So what do the community think about these particular issues? And then on the bottom here, we've got one of those metrics about the traditional employee survey is dead. So if we look at these two, first of all, these were issues that people tend to agree with, stuff about actionability and stuff about transparency. As I mentioned before, we're moving into an age of mass transparency where everyone expects information to be available to us at our fingertips at any time, and that's increasingly true outside organisations, and is probably not yet caught on within organisations, but it's something that we need to happen if approaches like these are going to infiltrate and push out the old kind of isolated approaches like the traditional employee survey. The other one is action. A lot of the time what organisations do in response to staff surveys is have to say, we need to go and do some discussion groups to find out what to do about this. In the future, and even now, what surely you want to do is to commission research which is not only going to tell you what the problems are, but it's actually going to tell you what to do about it, i.e. collecting suggestions from people, involving them in coming up with solutions. So actionability is very much something which is going to happen in the future. It's research which is actionable. We had a lot of talk about surveys. People tended not to agree with comments about surveys that much, but really it was about an evolution if you like, in how surveys are going to happen. I mean, you already see surveys becoming more frequent in organisations. This is definitely a trend I've seen over the last 5 years, pulse surveys, health checks, temperature checks. But whether they'll remain in their state, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure that they will. I think they're too big, they're too unwieldy. They're also too expensive. I mean, some of these surveys cost like £1 million, which I think is an insane amount of money to spend on a bit of research. Devices tend to be mentioned by people who definitely hate employee surveys, that they think it's dead. It's really interesting about devices. Who would have thought of all this stuff here that, you know, we'd all have computers in our pockets everywhere we go. I'm not sure, was this predicted 15 years ago? I don't know. I certainly didn't think of it when I got my first mobile phone, what I'd be using it for. But this is making a massive difference. And you know, one thing that we get a lot with organisations is that they have a lot of employees who aren't online. They're in factories, they're frontline, they're out and about. I mean, I think this is all going to change in the future as well. So for people who are still doing paper-based surveys, it's really not going to be there for much longer. It's going to surely be standard issue in the not too distant future when prices of smartphones and other technologies come down, that people will just be given this as kind of part of the courses when they join the organisation, and that's how they'll interact with their company. But what are organisations going to do when this stuff starts to come out? This is already coming out, and even next year, you know, smartphones that can do a lot. I don't even know what this is. I just found it. I guess some kind of hologram. Particularly excited by Google Glass. Has anyone, I mean, I always think everyone's heard of Google Glasses coming out. Has anyone not heard of this? I should say, who's heard? Okay, who's heard of it? Who's heard of this? Yeah, okay. And I love watching things on the internet about this. And on the Gadget Show last week, they had a review of it. It's really exciting. It's basically a computer. It's a computer on your head. And it's really going to change things, I think. I mean, not even in terms of research. I mean, the different things that you get when you mix the video camera and sound and face recognition and speech recognition, all this. Well, like, how are organisations going to adapt to this? I'll tell you what they're going to do. They're going to ban it straight away, like they do with everything. But Google won't ban it. You know, Google, they built this thing. They're going to foster its use in organisations. It's going to make a big difference. I don't really know what. It's just, you know, implanting, I don't know, microchips in brains and skins. I mean, you know, it's a bit far advanced, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. Something that didn't come up was social network analysis. I'm going to cover this quite quick because I know time's getting on now. But it's really very simple, the basics of it. Is that there are two types of data in organisations. All you guys pretty much collect attribute data. Okay, that's information about an individual, their demographics, they tick this box, this is their comment. And it's not information about the ties between people, that's called relational data. So this type of relationship, the direction of the relationship, the strength of the relationship. And that's very important because when you collect relational data, which can be very simple, like on Facebook or LinkedIn, a binary yes or no, or do you know this person? You can ask questions to people about their colleagues. How often do you typically turn to this person for information on work-related topics? How much more effective would you be in your work if you could communicate with this person more? And when you start to do that, you get a different data set. I'm trying to explain this very simply, but it's like a matrix. It's a list of everyone along the top and the same people down the bottom, and you list their interactions. And then when you start to build up a picture of that, you can also display it like this in a sociogram. And you can tell all sorts of things about people in terms of their position in a network, their role in a network. You get all sorts of different network statistics that call things like closeness and betweenness. And then you can build up demographic pictures about interactions between different departments. Like, no one knows about this stuff really, but as internal communicators, all communication is going to be communication within networks and how information spreads around. So I think it's something that you should at least be aware of. I'm going to skip over this very quickly because we are running out a bit of time. It was only to say from the stuff that we do and what's going to be important in the future is telling stories with data as well. not just giving 60 bar charts and going through them, boring people to death. The problem is that data-driven projects are often dull. Yeah, and there's a need to evoke emotion, to tell a story, just like a director does when they're producing a film. And what is data-driven storytelling? Very quickly, it's somewhere a mixture of big data, the source of data, all these different data streams that are coming in organizations, the technology and the tools for analysis, for producing dashboards, stuff about visualization, so graphics and designers, how we're actually making these things look, as making it easy for people to interpret and to analyze data. And also for you guys, the storytelling, which is the art. I mean, I think there's too much emphasis placed on the science of engagement, the science of internal, science of this. I honestly think the art is much more important. This is not doing research in universities. This is real-world research, and the aim of it is that we want action. Data-driven storytelling is somewhere in the middle of all that. Okay. So this is the last bit, really, is what's stopping us. We did another project about social media in organizations that basically asked, what are the barriers organizations face in embracing social media practices? You can download it, it's on the website. Unilever sponsored it, which is very kind of them. This is the same thing as last time. I'm not going to go into this, but again, it's like looking at these barriers. You can see here the biggest barrier is knowledge and understanding. The one that was rated as the highest by the community. The barrier is about defining an adequate business case for implementing social technologies in organizations. But I only wanted to focus on this one here that I like. You can see communication, leadership, trust, fear. And I think this is really the crux of why organizations are slow to move to this new method of feedback, because it's very threatening, and that's what fear is. It kind of emanates from individuals. But it's really a response. Fear is a response to something that's kind of threatening in the environment, which will give rise to flight or fight. And a lot of the time in organizations with social media, I think it's just bury your heads in the sand with it a lot of the time. Because giving people a say in an open forum can be quite dangerous. So, here's what I see as the emerging opportunities, and really just to sum up the things that I've been talking about. Employee voice is changing. I never realized all this stuff until we got into this over the last few years. But how you define employee voice. So if your organization has a survey and its strapline is, it's your shout, talk back, have your say, unless you're really sending all these comments around for everyone to read, then I kind of think you're lying. You should really use text analysis to distill the essence of conversations. Some brilliant tools out there now, absolutely brilliant, and it's something that you should definitely get into now. Surveys won't provide the authentic voice of employees because they don't have any interaction between participants. So there's no aggregation, there's no mechanism for people to say what's important. So the future employee research is moving away from the traditional survey. I mean, that's what I think. You clearly don't. And maybe we can talk about why that is. I mean, I don't know if you're saying that because you like surveys or because it's just think that they're so embedded that the survey is not dead. I hope it's the latter, to be honest. Don't ignore relational data. I know I really only touched on it very, very briefly, but I hope that I gave you enough information to realize that you're only looking at half the picture by looking at attribute data, by looking at information about me and what I'm like and who I am and what I say, and not my relationship to different people. Telling stories, as you know, I guess this is a big deal, isn't it? Internal communications, data-driven storytelling. And it's becoming increasingly important. People don't want to sit through presentations with loads and loads of numbers thrown at them. I say fear is holding us back. I actually think it's broader than that. It's a lot of stuff that's holding us back. But to me, fear is the main one. That's it. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you found that useful. Thank you.